Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Allie Williams. I'm the Executive Director of the Corporate Responsibility Association, and we will get started with our webinar. We want to welcome you to our webinar series, where today we're going to hear from a panel, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But beforehand, I wanted just to again welcome you and let you know a little bit about the Corporate Responsibility Association. Our mission here is to promote the practice and profession of corporate responsibility in service of good business. And the way that we do that is to educate and engage leaders at all levels to use corporate responsibility to do a few things: to reduce risk, improve operational efficiency, save money, attract talent, and encourage innovation. We have a value proposition which contains 4 of the core values. We have professional development, of which you're part of right now as you listen to the webinar series. It's a place to come and learn. We provide tools and toolkits for benchmarking. We define a focus on the CR industry. We're about networking. We provide opportunities to meet others with similar issues and concerns. We're a communications channel. We are a place where you can tell your corporate story. And we provide access. We provide a unique member-to-member experience. We are a model for other organizations and associations others will aspire to be. Finally, we have what were referred to as committees. We have changed that name to Thought Leadership Councils, a ratings and rankings PLC that discusses the methodology of several of the ratings and rankings companies out there, professional development group, which is made up of thought leaders around the country who work with things like the webinar series and peer-to-peer mentoring and other activities. Diversity and inclusion, to provide a voice for those in the CR space. Brand and reputation management group, which works with different brands and technologies and how to have and keep a very good reputation with their companies. And a brand new Thought Leadership Council that was launched just 2 weeks ago at the recent Commit Forum, the Responsible Supply Chain Management TLC. We're building that from the ground up under the leadership of Mike Wallace of Brown Flynn. And if anyone on the line is interested in being part of that core group to define the purpose, mission, and write that charter, please get in touch with me, and we will work with you to get that started. So to contact me, again, my name is Allie Williams. I'm the Executive Director of the Corporate Responsibility Association. My contact information is here, but simply emailing is perfect. It's Allie, A-L-L-I-E, .Williams at sharedexpertise.com. That's S-H-A-R-E-D, the letter X, P-E-R-T-I-S-E.com. And now let's get on with the webinar.
Thank you very much, Allie. This is Gregg Anderson with Crow Horwath. I really appreciate the opportunity for us to put together this panel as part of this overall webinar series. This has been an outgrowth of the Thought Leadership Council that Allie mentioned under professional development. And I've had a chance to work with people that are focused on corporate responsibility and sustainability issues from many different organizations as we work on defining what corporate responsibility is, what skills are needed, what knowledge is needed. And I thought I would just start out with a couple quotes and observations here. The first one from Charles Darwin, of all people: "It's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It's the one that is the most adaptable to change." I think that's pertinent as we all look at our profession. It certainly is one that's changing. Many of us were at the Commit Summit a couple weeks ago, and certainly we see a lot of change in our organizations. What's interesting, though, is the brutal fact is, and I found this not only in the Harvard Business Review, but in a lot of different studies, seems like at least 70%, and that seems to be the common number, of all change initiatives fail. That's a pretty high failure rate. And but then we kind of peel the onion back a little bit, and Ken Blanchard, the management consultant, he observed that 29% of change initiatives are launched without any formal structure. And then Towers Watson, as they do their surveys, they found that 87% train their managers to manage change, but less than 1/4 of the people that receive that training say it's effective. So what we thought we would do is, why don't we bring in a couple people that do this for a living, and I'd like to introduce the panelists on our webinar here. We've got Bruno Sarda, the Director of Sustainability Operations. I've known Bruno working on the Thought Leadership Council together. And then a colleague of mine at Crow here, Lisa Voeller, who has worked with many different organizations on some of their change initiatives. And the agenda that we're going to follow, we're going to talk about establishing a vision, understanding culture, assembling the components of change, and then managing change. But before we get into that, I thought, Bruno, maybe you could share with the group here, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and maybe some of your experience in some of the recent change initiatives that you've been involved in.
Sure, thanks. Well, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be with you today. So my role at Dell, I head up what we call sustainability operations, which is really all the kind of the business management, business strategy, business integration side of sustainability. So it's really how do we better align it, better integrate it with the core business and take it from what it might have been in the past as a set of standalone discrete initiatives to really part of how we both how we do business and how we go to market. I also have another hat. I work quite a bit in academia. I'm an adjunct professor with Arizona State University, and for the last 3+ years now have also been teaching on the role of both sustainability leadership as both a career platform and a driver for change in business. And so I guess change-related initiatives in my recent life, maybe in the last year or two, there's been two that I can just mention, and maybe we'll elaborate later. One is, about a year ago now, Dell introduced a big refresh of our sustainability strategy, our sustainability plan, something we call the Legacy of Good, with 21 specific goals and objectives looking out to the year 2020, some that are kind of a continuation and elevation of things we had done before, and some that are actually quite new and provocative. So that's been a great platform to bring the change conversation inside the company. And then separate from that, actually, I helped ASU design and develop a brand new type of executive master's program, actually, which was really informed by some of the work we had done on this Thought Leadership Council with the CRA, going back a couple of years and really looking at what are the key barriers to change and really advancing sustainability inside of organizations, and really helped ASU design a program around, so how do you train and educate and empower executives to go kind of break those barriers in their organizations.
Great, thanks, Bruno. I'm sure we'll explore those couple different initiatives as we get into the different topics here. Lisa, how did you get into this business, and what's your background?
Hi, good morning, Greg, and good afternoon for folks that are on the East Coast time. Well, in terms of my experience, I am a partner with Crow Horwath in Management Consulting, and really, the statistics that you brought up earlier, Greg, my job is to help clients not be one of those statistics and helping them implement change successfully. I've been doing work around organizational change management and culture, providing a host and variety of consulting services since the mid-90s, doing things such as culture and change readiness assessments, organizational change management planning and management and action plans, leadership enrollment and coaching, communication planning, organization structure alignment, workforce transition, a whole variety of areas that kind of encompass culture, encompass organizational change. And really what brought me into this in the first place was really, if you look at, in the 90s when a lot of this really started and people started really thinking about this very seriously, and really when the terms that coined organizational change management was really triggered at a time when technology and the pace of change was increasing rapidly, and the organizations had to figure out ways to adapt to that pace of change, and finding that implementing major change, whether it's technology or what have you, is very challenging if you don't really focus and address the people and organizational aspects. So that's really what got me into this, is starting with a lot of my clients that were trying to implement major change, usually driven from technology, and how do you move to implement and embrace it and really effectively sustain the changes. More currently, I really focus on the government sector side, so I help a lot of large entities from federal, state, and local governments try to implement change initiatives and help them through that process.
Great, thanks, Lisa. For those of you that are attending the webinar, you'll notice there's a chat window, and I think as Bruno and Lisa shared their experience, you've got an opportunity here to ask questions. I'll serve as a moderator, but feel free to ask questions as we go through the presentation and the dialogue here. And when appropriate, I'll field those questions and pose it to our panelists. I'd like to share with you just a quote here from Cotter, which is, without a sensible vision, a transformation effort can easily dissolve into a list of confusing and incompatible projects that can take the organization in the wrong direction or nowhere at all. And this is from 1995. And so I thought we would first kind of talk about, as part of a change initiative, establishing the vision is pretty important. And what we'd like to do is, let's, Heather, go ahead and bring up the first polling question. And we'd really like all of you to choose the answer, and choose one answer here. When you think about your organization, is it well understood and assists in driving change, or is it more aspirational and therefore it, in some cases, might not help drive change? Is your vision understood and communicated, or do you not have a vision that exists? And if you're unsure, don't know, go ahead and choose E there. And I'll give a couple more seconds here for you to go ahead and reply to that question. And so, Heather, can we go ahead and close that poll? And are we able to show the results there?
Yeah, actually, this is Allie again. I can see them on my screen. I'm not sure if you can, but 25% of the people answered that it is well understood and assists in driving change. 44% answered it is aspirational but does not help drive change. 21% it is not understood or communicated. 6% does not exist, and 10% are unsure or don't know.
Great. So, Lisa, I guess as you look at those poll results, what are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I think it's great that 25% of those that are on this call had selected A. I would say that is not, and it may be just representative of the group that's part of this call and their interest, but I would say that's not probably representative if you would take a poll across the nation kind of thing, having a vision that's well understood and driving change. So first of all, 25%, I think that's higher than I would have anticipated. And B, in terms of 44% selecting that one, that it's aspirational and doesn't drive change, certainly we see that often as well. And I know that's one of the key components, is really having a well thought out vision that helps drive change. 37% had picked those last three, and I would have expected that statistic to be higher, but I think, again, it's kind of maybe the population that's in on this call. I think in looking at the challenges while working clients in establishing a vision, I really see two challenges when you kind of look and think through an organization's vision. And first of all, and I think you kind of set it up that way when we have this polling question, is really what is a vision and what really defines it? And then I think the second challenge is what is a good vision compared to a great vision? I think those are a couple of challenges that often I see clients face. And I know in the subsequent slides there's some discussion on it, but before we switch to those slides, I do want to share one quote that came from John F. Kennedy's speech that really still today is a model of what exemplifies an excellent vision. And that is his speech in terms of putting a man on the moon. And his speech says, "This nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before the decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth." And I think still to this day, as you break down what is an excellent vision, it still kind of embodies, even 50 years plus later, an excellent vision.
That's an interesting example, and I'm going to move to the next slide. And so I think we need to probably, take down the poll. Okay, so from the magazine Fast Company, they had an article on 5 rules for making your vision stick. And I think when you look at the mission to the moon, I think you could probably connect these attributes of that vision statement. Or it's certainly inspirational, challenging, certainly very clear on what is needed to be achieved, task specific, and it addresses it's the whole country that is being included in that vision. Bruno, maybe you could share, as you talked about these couple of different initiatives, how did you go about developing and communicating a vision?
We part of what helped us with, and I'll talk more to the Dell example right now, this what we call this legacy of good, this 2020 plan, was really the result of, I would say, a cascading set of initiatives from, several years ago, really reframing our place in the world as a company. Dell, as many people know the story, grew up as kind of a disruptor in the space, mostly a consumer-driven company. We remember the commercials from the 90s with the guy, dudes, you need a Dell, and to today, which we're a very different company, much bigger presence in the broader IT space, acquired actually a variety of companies. So we went through a big effort to really reframe the, who we are, why do we exist, what are we good at, really finding the purpose aligned actually around ultimately kind of if you will, a brand of what we call the power to do more, and everything that Dell does now is aimed in that direction, that we ultimately enable the power to do more, and that really helped us actually then look at what we're doing in the corporate responsibility space, use that as an envelope to rationalize our sustainability work, our supply chain work, our corporate philanthropy, the work we do in things like disaster relief and community engagement. And from the power to do more, developed really this let's call it maybe a vision aligned with the brand architecture that we call powering the possible. So again, along the same line of it's about the power to do more, and maybe the power to do more with less, the power to do more with others. And so this powering the possible, which then really became the platform to say, okay, so if that's what we're about, what will it take? And that then became the catalyst for all of the work that went into developing this 2020 plan, which, as I mentioned, we launched last year, has 21 specific goals. So, it has this broader story of what are we trying to get done by 2020, why we think it's important, what it's going to take, and what it's going to look like when we get there. So again, this notion of inspiration and challenge, including our big overarching goal of what we call the 10 by 20, which is by 2020, we want to be able to demonstrate that actually the good that comes from our technology is at least 10x what it takes to create and use it. So from a net positive type of perspective. But then, again, 21 specific goals with milestones, with metrics, with measurable outcomes to really make it real, which then really helps push it inside of the organization, right? So that ultimately people have to go do things in order to deliver on this plan. And so I think that really helps from having this kind of aspirational, this vision that everybody wants to achieve. It's like, yeah, I want to be part of that, but then also along with that, then giving them the sense of here's the why, here's the how, and here's your role. And so this sense of engagement, this sense of inclusion, and not just with our employees. Actually, the process of developing this plan was very inclusive of our suppliers, actually of a broad set of customers, other sets of stakeholders, and a lot of kind of both internal and external communication along the way. And that really helped. By the time we launched it, there was this clear call to action that this is something everybody needs to be part of making happen, and it's been very successful.
Great, thanks, Bruno. So as we think about vision, one of the key things that I think needs to be understood is culture. And I've spent some time working with clients in Austin, and I can say Austin, Texas has its unique culture, just like many different areas do. And I found it was somewhat interesting. TMC is a company that actually has a software tool called Cultural Navigator. And what this tool does, it allows companies to assess culture by getting individual perspectives on how they like to work or how they like to act, and they kind of look at different attributes here. And what you see on the screen here is, are you more fluid or do you like things more fixed? Do you like to be or do you like to do? Do you like flexibility or do you like order? Do you like clear hierarchy or do you like equality? And so you can look at these attributes and in some way describe the culture, and I think in many cases organizations have different cultures in different parts of the organization. And it's interesting that there are some tools available these days to help assess what that culture is. Bruno, how do you describe culture, and how do you, what has been your experience and how you measure it and understand the culture of the organization?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, I guess, ultimately culture is the collection of our shared kind of stories and history and values, right? And again, this kind of sense of belonging to something greater. So, with us as an organization, a lot of our culture, I mean, we're founder-led, and in fact now founder-owned companies. Obviously, even though we've grown to very large size, there's still very strong alignment to the founder, Michael Dell, still as this inspiration, as this kind of icon, as part of the culture. From his storied beginnings, right, dropping out of college, building computers in his dorm room, to building it into a Fortune 50 company. Again, last year, a big kind of seminal event of Michael deciding to take the company private and becoming, majority owner again, and all of the why. And that was very strongly rooted in the culture, what we call this winning culture, very strongly rooted in entrepreneurship. And then, how do you kind of measure and understand it? So you do things like branding. There's language, there's acronyms, there's kind of little lingo. We often talk about the speed of Dell, because Dell tends to be a some like strong bias to action. When you talk about the being versus doing, it's a big doing culture. So very equal. Like there's actually no offices at Dell. Even Michael has a cube. It's a big cube, but it's a cube. Those kinds of things, which is relatively common in the tech industry. Very kind of the egalitarian that way. Part of what's been interesting, I'll just mention this quickly. I mentioned earlier we grew significantly in the last 3 or 4 years by acquisition, including, one very large acquisition we've made was actually Perot Systems, which overnight, was about 25,000 new employees who themselves came from a very strongly kind of founder-led organization, right? Ross Perot, very, very colorful, very dynamic guy who had really put his own brand on the culture. And so it's been a very interesting experiment, and several other acquisitions, more, smaller, more entrepreneurial startup type companies that we've acquired. And how do you become then more conscious of what is our culture, what is their culture, what is it about their culture that maybe they really want to retain or that we really want to, absorb? What is it about our culture that we really want them to understand? And so I think going through that process for the last 3 or 4 years of, having to be explicit about this, clash of cultures of sorts, and recognizing what do we have in common, what is it that we have that you don't, and vice versa. And it's been, I think it's really helped us be crisper about those elements of our culture that we value most, and that most directly aligned to what we do.
Great, thanks. I found the Shook's model of cultural change. In many of our change initiatives, in some cases, the current culture doesn't support where we want to go, and the current culture doesn't support the vision that we've outlined. And so we need to influence and change the culture. And here's a quote from Millard Fuller: "It's easier to act your way to a new way of thinking than to think your way to a new way of acting." And it really gets to this question of, do you change the culture to change behavior, or do you change behavior to change the culture? So Lisa, from your experience, which comes first?
I think that is a very, challenging aspect of changing the culture, and I really look at all the projects and clients that I've worked with over the years, and really, I think they're so interrelated that you really can't ignore one for the other. To change culture, really it isn't just changing the soft stuff, touchy stuff. It's really dealing with the tough stuff. And I've got a couple of examples I want to share with you in situations that I think kind of exemplify the story. First organization had a problem. It was a publicly traded company that kept missing their financial forecast. And they decided to hire consultants to redesign and fix their financial processes. As a result of that project, the client and the consultants helped implement a new streamlined financial processes with clear performance targets and measures. After those things were implemented and in place over a period of time, there was little to no impact and no improvement. And really the reason for that is that there was a culture and behavioral aspect to this that nobody at that time was cognizant of. And that was a command and control kind of environment where the very highest level had dictated that their financial results would be positive, and folks had an opportunity with estimate to completion estimates to make them more favorable to protect their jobs. And ultimately, when those got realigned, those forecasts were incorrect, and therefore they kept missing their financial targets. But the key thing there was, you look at some of the processes and all that, everything seemed to look in place, but it was the behaviors that needed to change in order for them to be successful. Another client had to actually, through a class action lawsuit, was and during a settlement, was asked to change their culture. And the organization had attempted to change their culture over 3 years and was unsuccessful. And really, again, it ended up being because they weren't looking at all the aspects at what contributes to the culture. And I think that's a really important part of this, as we'll talk more about it, is what are the things that contribute to culture, and it's the behaviors, it's the values, it's all these other things that will make or break a change initiative. I think, the first, lesson learned out of all that is don't ignore culture on any change initiative. And really the second one is, culture is like a fingerprint. Many times I have clients ask me, how does our culture compare to our competition? What is a good culture? And I think as, Bruno discussed and as Greg discussed, there's so many aspects of culture, and an organization's culture is like a fingerprint, and it's unique to that organization. You have to look at it as a composite and whole, and where that organization wants to take it and leverage its core competencies to move to whatever next level that they're trying to achieve.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. We're going to go ahead and move to our second polling question. And Heather, if you could go ahead and bring up the poll for our participants. This question, we'd like to understand, when you think about your organization, does your organization consistently survey employees in order to identify culture shifts? Does your organization regularly survey the employees, but it isn't really necessarily geared to providing insight into culture shifts? C is infrequently, and we only really do the surveys when we've got some specific issues. D is rarely or not at all, and E is if you're unsure or you don't know. And let's see here. I understand that we have we may have a couple questions, Allie, as we're getting our polling results. Are you able to relay what the question might be?
Definitely. Hang on one second. Is Crow using other culture diagnostic tools to help its clients measure its client's culture? That was one. Another one was for Bruno. You touched on it a little bit. How do you engage employees around your 21 goals? Do you use any new technologies in this communication and engagement?
Great, thanks, Allie. And we'll keep the poll open here. I guess to answer that first question is, yes, Crow does have some diagnostic tools that we've used. I think as I look at our experience, we've got an initiative right now to standardize and streamline and provide some benchmarking across different organizations. But it's historically been somewhat ad hoc and on a project-by-project basis.
Hey, Greg, can I just interject on this one?
Of course.
In terms of, we do have diagnostic tools that we use and have been using over the decades that have evolved, but we don't, we don't have outside tools that we necessarily have leverage and use. I don't know if that was question in looking at what are other products out there. We actually have our own kind of proprietary tools that have been proven over the years that we've modified, and we use those to do our assessments.
Great, thanks. And Bruno, on the second question, maybe you could provide some feedback on that one. That was related to the engagement in the 2020.
Sure. Yeah. I'll keep it brief. As I mentioned, part of what we did along the way, it was about an 18-month process to even develop the plan. So along the way, we did a variety of things to try to really get employee input into, what was it that they liked about what Dell had done in the past, what was it that they knew, what was it that they believed or perceived to be true versus what they knew to be true. So, really kind of try to understand where our employee population was. From there, following the plan, and rollout and really kind of, there was a variety of things we did, from a bunch of town halls across different locations, all hands with functional leaders, those kinds of things, other what you would call maybe typical corp comms kind of things, from messaging through internal, like intranet platforms, email, etc. We then started also using some tools. So we actually use a tool internally called Chatter. It's like a little social media tool that's part of the broader Salesforce.com platform that now is very widely used by employees around the globe, including some of our top executives. Actually, Michael Dell himself is often found on Chatter, either sharing news or responding to what others are talking about. So And then there's affinity groups within Chatter. So it's been a great way to identify those with the most passion and the champions. Something else we did that I'll just mention briefly is one of our 21 goals actually is specifically designed for that. It's basically that we want 100% of Dell locations to be directly engaged in driving sustainability initiatives. So, in some cases, it's easy to focus on the big ticket items, the energy procurement, the product design, the big suppliers, et cetera. The fact is, we have over 100,000 employees across, over 100 countries. And so as a very specifically intended outcome, if you will, is we designed a goal that says we want every place where Dell employees are to have something going on. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be huge or even that material, but just so that everybody feels like their place and their part of the organization is connected to the bigger goal. So that's actually been very helpful in getting all kinds of parts of the business to talk about what they do, whether it's, maybe a location in Malaysia will have, they do a monthly tree planting exercise. Others will have a bike to work day. Others will organize kind of virtual carpools and, all kinds of things. And others obviously bigger and at the facility level, but everybody feels like they have something to contribute to the bigger client plan, and that's been very helpful.
Great. I hope that answers the question. Heather, why don't we go ahead and bring up the polling results?
As she's doing that, this is Allie again. We have gotten a ton of questions that have come in, and for the sake of everybody's time this afternoon, I will capture all of the questions moving forward. We will give those to Lisa, Bruno, and Greg, and then as I follow up with everybody with a copy of today's webinar recording, I will include their answers to those questions. I hope that's fair for everybody. I just want to make sure that we kind of stay on time.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, if we get through, we can go back. But I think it's important to get through the meat of your presentation, and then we'll go. So with that, okay. I'll stop. So
very good, and perhaps you could share with us the results here.
Sure. So the results for my organization surveys, our employees, 13% said consistently, 23% said regularly but does not provide insight, 25% said infrequently and only when there are specific issues, 34% rarely or not at all, and 8 were unsure.
Interesting. So thanks for everybody sharing their perspective there. This chart that I bring up on the screen at this point, that's the components of change. This has been around for a couple decades, but I find this diagram helps me think as I'm working with clients. As we're looking at a change initiative, do we have all the components that we need? Anyway, which is vision, skills, incentives, resources, and an action plan. And as we look at these different components, Lisa, in your experience, which components do you personally see missing?
Well, Greg, it's funny when I was looking at this particular slide. I must have some pretty challenging clients because I would say that often all of them are missing. So I thought it was kind of interesting when I was thinking through this. But, clearly, different clients have different situations, but it's not uncommon to see many missing pieces. So if any of you are out there and feeling like you're missing more than just some of those on the diagram, don't be too alarmed. I mean, it's definitely not uncommon that there's many pieces that are sometimes missing. And I think oftentimes it's because folks don't necessarily, and I think it starts at the leadership level, really recognize what are all those components that contribute to change and to contribute to culture, and what are all the things that you really need to understand in order to make that change. And I thought it was interesting on that previous slide in the polling question around, many organizations will do surveys, but how often do those organizations really align those to the culture? And, that's not uncommon to see that many folks are not even seeing those surveys or don't understand how that aligns to culture shift. And I think that is one of the key takeaways out of that is how do you create change in culture if you don't even align and understand the components to make that change? And again, it has so many multiple complex aspects to it. If you look at vision alone, when you talk about vision, I think oftentimes it's kind of linked to that leadership position of the person that is viewed as that vocal leader that has that vision that can inspire employees. But oftentimes, in many organizations, especially large, complex organizations, the chance that you're ever even see your leader or be exposed to that is pretty small. And the folks that are really the leaderships for the groups of employees are really the managers and in the other levels. And how do you make sure that they are embodying and exhibiting the same kind of culture attributes that you desire? So I think this whole thing is much more complex than sometimes it shows. And I think really the key outcome out of that is really thinking through what drives change and what are the components of the culture, and making sure that if you're assessing it, to make sure that you understand how those links to culture get to that baseline fingerprint, should I say, of the culture, and then really think through what are the things that you really want to change, because you're not going to be able to change everything, but what is going to be the most important for you to change to, again, achieve that end result. And I think that's really important out of all of that.
Thanks, Lisa. I think what's interesting in today's day and age, and I suspect that many of you on the webinar right now are probably multitasking in different ways and doing email and working on other things, and there's a tremendous amount of information that we're all being bombarded with. And I think some of the challenge is how do you communicate in this day and age where emails aren't read, memos can't be read, reports can't be read. How do you communicate these days? And I find it pretty interesting that there's a lot of research around the power of stories. And the famous Maya Angelou quote, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And it seems to me that to be effective in communication, and this relates to culture and change, things need to be implicit, evocative, emergent, sense-making to get your message through. And, Bruno, in a large organization like Dell, and you've got many different initiatives going on, how has Dell used the story to help communicate?
Yeah, no, I mean you're right. I think we've certainly found it's a huge part of how you try to communicate. And speaking of culture, we've historically been a very kind of data-driven, kind of an engineering culture a little bit, and bringing more of that story element to really kind of connect the dots and kind of feed that part of our brain that just craves meaning and really wants not to just know the facts, those are important, but to really have that bigger picture. In fact, this executive masters I was mentioning earlier at ASU, there's a whole piece of the curriculum which is entirely dedicated to that, because we've certainly recognized how critical it is to drive sustainable change and to really move an organization towards sustainability. You really have to bring in the power of story in terms of the why and the how and the outcomes. At Dell, we've done this in many ways. I mentioned earlier, for example, the humble beginnings of the company, that kind of entrepreneurial spirit of our founder, continues to be a story that sells, if I can say that. But we've done it in other ways, a couple of examples quickly. We've done a lot of work, for example, in really trying to move in a different direction with packaging. And when you think of Dell, you may not think of packaging, but the fact is, we ship a lot of stuff, we sell a lot of stuff. Sometimes they're sizable things. So actually, tens and tens and tens of millions of pounds of packaging that we put out into the environment every year, and it matters. It matters to us. It also matters to our customers, because ultimately they're the ones who have to dispose of it once they're done unpacking the stuff which we ship to them. And so we've done a lot of really interesting things in packaging innovation, but we've done it in a way that's been, I think, very closely aligned with our own story. You know, it's a story of again, innovation, entrepreneurship. When we first pioneered some bamboo-based packaging, you know, great story there around how we worked with some of the local communities actually in China, not too far from where our products are ultimately packaged, so that you don't have to ship the packaging thousands of miles, making sure that we were growing the bamboo at least 1,000 miles from panda habitat, so that we weren't competing for a food source for an endangered animal, and all the stories that kind of brings to mind. How we would actually air dry the fibers so that it was a very kind of low energy process that yielded a very good product. We've done similar things with our mushroom-based packaging, which also has been a great story of innovation and kind of almost quirkiness. You know, Michael Dell was on stage earlier this year actually eating a piece of our mushroom packaging. Don't worry, it's not those kinds of mushrooms, but just to show that in fact it's 100% basically natural, biodegradable, completely compostable. There's not a chemical in it, and yet it's a great packaging solution. And then we've also used story a lot through the lens of our customers. You know, we've done a great project with eBay actually in Arizona, where I live, of putting one of our modular data centers on the rooftop of their building to demonstrate when we talk about fresh air and what that means in terms of cooling data centers without necessarily air conditioning, but just moving fresh air through, and how much that can save, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars to a data center in terms of electricity costs. But again, the story of you put basically a data center that sits on top of a building in Phoenix in the summer with no powered cooling, and that the thing works fine, and so just those pictures that conveys, and then you pull in some video and you pull in some testimonials, and all of that really kind of brings to life I could tell you all day long how we've increased, the tolerances for heat and humidity in our server architecture and blah, blah, and that's awesome. But, again, being able to show you the pictures of that rooftop data center that's not powered, that's not cooled by anything that uses up electricity is a whole different way to tell that story.
Great. I'm sure we could spend probably a couple hours today talking about different stories like that. It's very interesting stuff there. This particular graphic is one that pulled from a book, Leading Culture Change, What Every CEO Needs to Know, and kind of steps in managing change in year 1, year 2, year 3. We see the connection to culture. Lisa, I'm sure this is oversimplifying things, but from your perspective, what does every CEO need to know?
Well, I'd say that, first of all, the graphic is actually, on the surface, is a very good, solid graphic, but I think it's all what's underlining behind it. And I think the key thing for a CEO and what they would need to know is really that interrelationship, as I think has been brought up in a number of different points in this call, is the connection between leaders and stakeholders and employees, and if you have a change team, all of those different groups of folks, should I call them, and how they interact and how they contribute to making that change happen. And I think recognizing that is very, very important. And then ultimately, how do you measure the change around that? So I think when it comes to looking at the activities in managing change, such as defining the vision and linking it to strategy, that's one component. But how do you, engage all those various groups, whether it's the leaders, the employees, stakeholders, and customers? I heard, Bruno earlier talking about how they brought in customers and stakeholders and defining their vision, and how that part of it in itself starts changing culture. So there's so many different interdependencies and linkages that are important to recognize, and I think that would be the key thing. And then with that, how do you measure the change?
Very good. Let's move to our last polling question. and this is where we'd like, go ahead, Heather, and bring up the poll. When you think of your organization, tell us if you have ongoing initiatives in place to change and enforce the culture. So it's an ongoing process. Or is your organization, when you have specific culture issues, you'll have targeted initiatives. C would be, your organization really doesn't consider culture as part of the change efforts, and if you're unsure, don't know, choose D. Bruno, many times I see a lot of the focus on the change initiative is focused on the doing part and not the measuring or are we achieving what we're doing here. I think you've shared with us how you've kind of addressed some of the culture issues. Heather, let's go ahead and bring up the results of the poll. And Allie, if you could share with us.
Yep. Poll results are that 22% say that ongoing initiatives in place to change and enforce the culture, 39% targeted initiatives to address specific culture issues, 33% not address culture as part of change efforts, and 7% were unsure or don't know.
Yeah, so Bruno, with your work with the university, does that 33% surprise you?
It actually doesn't so much. I mean, it's interesting to see the numbers from the sample we have here today. I think, and even talking to those who participate in the program where I teach, and again, a lot of the external engagements we've done, both to solicit input for our plan and to communicate our plan out, you definitely notice quickly when you're talking to somebody who's working in a kind of a purpose-driven organization where they're clear, not just what they do, but why they do it, and how what they do ties back to the broader picture. And to me, that's kind of what this question ultimately gets to is how do you give everybody in their organization, whether they're serving food in the cafeteria to where they're moving, boxes in a warehouse to, doing the books and the accounting to talking to customers is, who are we, why do we exist, what role do we play, at the end of the day, what would be missed if we didn't exist? All these questions, I think, if most of your employees can answer that, you're, I think, much better armed, I think, to persuade, to inspire, to engage. One of the realities of sustainability professionals in general is we very, very rarely operate from a place of authority. It's all about influence. It's all about, inspiration and persuasion and not coercion, but getting others to sign up for something that nobody is telling them they have to do. And so I think the more organizations find ways, I think, to better define and understand what are those key elements of their culture that really defines their purpose and their values, and then find ways to continually reinforce that, not necessarily to change it, but just to reinforce it. And if there's some derailers, then certainly to change that. But I think purpose-driven organizations and kind of culture-aware organizations tend to be much higher functioning in general.
Yeah, very good. Heather, if we can take down the poll and go back to the slides. I found, how do we know if the culture or change is happening? And I found this was kind of useful. This is from the Heart of Change field guide. And Lisa, when you're working with a client, how do you know if things are changing?
Yeah. Well, and we talked about a little bit about the measuring the change and, really understanding what are you starting from? What's your baseline? I think that's such an important element of it, because how do you know you're making any improvements if you don't have something to measure against? And, you think of culture, well, is this the soft, touchy stuff? And it's like, no, there's actually measurements that you can measure on key attributes that kind of tell you where you're starting from, and then with that, where you ultimately desire to be in certain areas, because again, you have to look at a culture being a fingerprint, and then looking at movements towards those changes. And I think ultimately, at the end of the day, and not measuring the culture change in through surveys and other aspects, but really at the end of the day, a client will see improvements towards performance goals and targets, kind of the end game. Are they seeing significant improvements in quality, in service, in speed, in turnaround time, or is it production in terms of the quantity going out the door? I mean, all those aspects, if you look at the change initiatives and you're trying to ultimately succeed in whatever industry you're in, you're going to be measuring through some performance targets, and really with the culture aligned with that, you should see significant improvements in those targets and whatever goals you're seeking to achieve. And as I had mentioned in a couple of my early examples, if you ignore those aspects of culture and how they contribute to that, the chances for your success is, statistically, is pretty small. I mean, if you look at the polling question number 3, I was looking at the number of respondents that answered does not address culture as part of change efforts or unsure, don't know, but it ends up being 40%. That's very typical in terms of the overall surveys that I've done year after year in terms of, the range does, come from between 60 to 70% of change initiatives fail. And again, the really key part of the reason why that fails is the lack of aspect in looking at culture and the organizational aspects to contributing to success.
Very good. I'd just like to share with that. I'd like to thank our panelists for participating in the webinar today. I think we could probably take another couple hours on this topic and explore what works and what doesn't work in many cases. We share with you, here's a website that has a lot of good information, and then of course LinkedIn, of course, also has an active community of professionals that are focused on change management. I know, Allie, we probably have a number of questions, and I'm looking at the time that we have here, but it sounds like what we'll do is, as we send out the materials, we'll include answers to the questions that you've posed. I would also encourage you, go ahead and feel free to reach out to our panelists with additional questions. I think you can certainly tell both Bruno and Lisa are very passionate about what they're doing, and in many cases this is not all figured out, and there's opportunities for all of us to improve upon that. Allie, I guess would you like to kind of wrap it up for us here?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to thank you, Greg, because your dedication and passion is exceptional. So thank you so much for your expertise and your leadership and your guidance in moderating this session. Bruno and Lisa, thank you also very much. As Greg mentioned, we will be sending the information out to all of our all of you who listened. That you'll get the full recording and the answered questions, so we'll get that out to you. And please stay tuned for our next in our webinar series on November 19th. It's the Global Supply Chain Complexities and the Changing Risk Management. It is part 1 of a series moderated by Art Stewart with Art Stewart Strategies. So please stay tuned for that. Get registered for that, because that's going to fill up, and that will be very, very exciting. Thank you all once again for your opportunity today and thank you for the opportunity to be with us, and appreciate all of what you're doing for this profession. Have a great day, but that will end the webinar.